You know, we all like to think of ourselves as pretty logical people. We weigh the pros and cons, and we make rational choices. But what if I told you that's not really how it works, especially when there's risk involved? It turns out our decisions are systematically, predictably, and often completely illogical. Today, we're going to dive into the theory that completely flipped our understanding of how we make decisions.
Okay, let's just jump right in with a little thought experiment. Imagine I hand you $1,000. It's yours. Now, you've got a choice to make. Option A, I'll give you another $500, guaranteed, a sure thing. Or, option B, we can flip a coin. You've got a 50-50 shot at winning another $1,000 or walking away with nothing extra. What do you do? Which one feels right?
All right, ready for round two? Different scenario. This time, I'm giving you $2,000. But you have to make another choice. Option C is you take a sure loss of $500. You just hand it back. Or you can go for option D, another 50-50 gamble. You either lose $1,000 or you lose nothing at all. What's the move this time?
So what's fascinating is that when you ask thousands of people these questions, a very clear pattern shows up. In that first problem, almost everyone chooses A, the sure $500. They play it safe, they're risk averse. But in the second problem, most people suddenly become gamblers. They choose D, the risky option. But here's the crazy part. Financially, both problems are exactly the same. In both cases, you're choosing between ending up with $1,500 for sure or taking a 50-50 shot at having either $1,000 or $2,000. So why on earth do we completely flip our strategy? Well, that contradiction, that's where things get really interesting.
To figure out this puzzle, here's our game plan. First, we're going to talk about the myth of the perfectly rational human. Then, we'll get into the new idea, prospect theory, and its two main pillars, how we think about gains and losses, and how our brains mess with probability. And finally, we'll see how this plays out in the real world.
So, before we can really appreciate this new way of thinking, we have to understand the old theory it completely replaced. This idea that we're all like little supercomputers, which, as it turns out, just isn't true.
For a long time, the main idea in economics was something called expected utility theory. It's a really neat and tidy model that basically says we make choices to get the best possible final outcome. We look at our total wealth and pick the option that maximizes it. It assumes we're all consistent, logical, and focused on that final number.
Yeah, there's just one problem. It's wrong. When you actually put it to the test with real people, you find, and I'm quoting the original research here, common, large, and lawful violations of the theory. And these aren't just random slip-ups. They are predictable, hardwired patterns of thinking that go against pure logic.
And this is one of the coolest patterns. It's called the reflection effect. Take a look here. When you frame a choice in terms of gains, we tend to lock in the smaller, sure win. We don't want to risk it, we're risk averse. But if you just reflect that exact same choice into the world of losses, our preferences do a complete 180. We'd rather gamble on a big loss than accept a smaller, certain one. All of a sudden, we're risk-seeking.
And this gets to the absolute core of it. We don't make decisions based on our final wealth. We make them based on the change from where we are right now. We think in terms of gains and losses relative to a starting point, our status quo. This is called the reference effect, and it perfectly explains that puzzle from the beginning. The first problem felt like a gain, so we played it safe. The second felt like a loss, so we took a big risk.
And this is where two researchers, Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, came in and changed everything. They didn't just poke holes in the old model, they built a new one from the ground up that could actually explain what's going on in our heads.
And they were super clear about their goal. Right there in their 1977 paper, they said the old theory just wasn't an adequate descriptive theory. See, they weren't trying to tell us how we should act. They wanted to describe how we actually act, with all our weird biases included.
And really, that's the whole difference in a nutshell. Expected utility theory is prescriptive. It's like a rule book for a perfectly rational robot. Prospect theory is descriptive. It's like a user's manual for the messy, wonderful, and sometimes illogical human brain. So how does it work? Well, prospect theory really rests on two big pillars. Let's start with the first one, which is all about how we feel about gains and losses. It's called the value function.
This idea has three key features. First, as we've already seen, it all starts from a reference point. It's about gains and losses, not total cash. Second, there's diminishing sensitivity. Think about it. The difference between winning $10 and $20 feels amazing, but the difference between winning $1,000 10 and $1,020? Not so much. Same thing works for losses.
And third, and this is the big one, is something called loss aversion.
This is a super powerful idea. Psychologically, the sting of losing $100 is way more intense than the joy of finding $100. For our brains, losses just loom larger than gains. It's why most of us would say no thanks to a simple coin flip where you could win $150, but you could also lose $100. That potential pain just isn't worth the potential gain.
Okay, so that's how we value the prize. But what about the odds of winning it? Well, it turns out our brains are just as quirky when it comes to weighing probabilities. And that's the second pillar, uncertainty weights. So the theory says we don't actually use the real probability, like, say, 1%, in our head. Instead, our brain swaps it out for a subjective uncertainty weight. It's not about math, it's about the emotional impact that chance has on us. All our hopes and fears wrapped up in one number. And here's how we mess it up. We totally overweight tiny probabilities. A 1 in a million shot doesn't feel like 0, it feels like, hey, there's a chance. But at the other end, we underweight high probabilities. A 99% chance of success is great, but our brain fixates on that 1% chance that it could all go wrong. And this one idea brilliantly explains two human behaviors that seem to contradict each other: playing the lottery and buying insurance. We buy a lottery ticket because our brain blows up that tiny chance of a massive win. And we buy insurance because our brain also blows up the tiny chance of a total disaster, making us happy to pay a little bit of money to make that fear go away.
Okay, let's tie all this together. Because these aren't just clever ideas for a psychology class. These mental glitches shape our most important decisions about money, health, you name it.
Prospect theory is why an investor might desperately cling to a losing stock. Selling it would mean making that loss real, so instead they become a risk taker, praying for it to bounce back. It's why a gambler who's down for the day starts making wild bets to try and get back to even. And it's why framing is everything. A 90% survival rate sounds fantastic, that's a gain. But a 10% mortality rate? That sounds terrifying, even though it's the exact same piece of information.
And as Kahneman and Tversky said so perfectly, any useful theory about decisions has to deal with how we're actually built. We're not calculators. We are, in their words, pleasure machines, driven by the gut feelings of gains and the painful sting of losses. So if there is one giant takeaway from all of this, it's that the frame is often more important than the picture itself. The words you use, the reference point you set, all of that can have a bigger impact on a decision than the cold, hard numbers.
Which really leaves us with this one last big question to chew on. If our choices could be completely flipped just by changing a few words, and our sense of risk is this predictably biased, what does it even mean to make a truly rational decision? Maybe the first step to making better choices is just admitting how beautifully irrational we all can be.